ABLE certified instructor or just in general should really consider when administering a curriculum. Having been in law enforcement now for, retired now, of course, but over 27 years, I've sat in the classroom as an attendee in training hundreds of times, and the thoughts and perceptions are often shaped by the current social stuff and climate that's happening in that moment. In recent years leading up to even now, 2023, I think law enforcement agencies in many parts of the world have been under increased scrutiny due to incidents of police violence, allegations of racial profiling, misuse of authority. I think we're all familiar with a lot of that and what we see in the media. And I've had the opportunity to engage and visit law enforcement agencies outside of the United States. And I can tell you that they face very similar challenges as we experience here in the States. And most notably, they are directly impacted by incidents that occur in the United States. Nonetheless, whether it be high profile cases, often involving situations that don't look great optically or could result in the unfortunate death of an individual, doing some of these encounters with law enforcement have sparked a lot of debates and calls for police reform. And of course, as we've seen in the media, widespread protests. This has created a complex and multifaceted environment with various implications and opportunities for bystandership. And in this environment, it presents, I believe, several negative consequences. First, it makes officers less likely to intervene when they see a colleague doing something wrong. They may be afraid of being punished or ostracized by their peers. Second, it makes people less likely to report misconduct. They may be afraid of retaliation or being seen as a troublemaker. And third, it creates a climate of fear and distrust, not just externally, but internally as well, which makes it difficult for law enforcement and communities to work together to solve problems. It's my belief that the perception of law enforcement has become more diverse and polarized. Some people view the police as protectors of public safety, while others perceive them as potential sources of harm or oppression. And this perception can shape how individuals interpret and respond to incidents they witness law enforcement being involved in. As we often talk about in ABLE, officer health and wellness is a big contributing factor to mistakes and misconduct. And some of that unwellness can lead to mistakes that can lead to misconduct. And I think that these things are often on the minds of students as they sit in classes or as they do their daily functions every day. And as you know, in the ABLE environment, promoting officer health and wellness and that pillar that we talk about, that third pillar of ABLE, really goes hand in hand with reducing mistakes and preventing misconduct. Nonetheless, we must recognize and continue to address the negative impacts on wellness has on law enforcement professionals, both sworn and civilian, and how active bystandership plays an important role in overcoming these challenges. As illustrated in the slide that you see before you, there are other challenges law enforcement face, such as limitation of resources needed to equip professionals with the tools needed to address their daily functions, more recruitment and retention. And we can probably spend an entire segment just on that. Is a huge challenge in the moment of law enforcement. So I say all this to say that, there are many challenges that contributes to the current climate in law enforcement. And these challenges are often at the forefront of the mind of students when they're sitting in your classrooms, and should be on your mind as you as an instructor. I know when I'm teaching and I'm instructing, whether I'm doing some type of presentation or I'm teaching a classroom, all of these challenges, among many that I haven't mentioned, are always on the forefront of my mind. And I picture myself as the student sitting there thinking about these things as they go through the ABLE curriculum and how it would benefit them in the long run. So hopefully it wasn't too long with that, but that's kind of my take on it.
No, not at all, Greg. And I actually think that that's the perfect transition to the next question that I was going to ask, which is really about, kind of reframing some of this. Of course, there are all of these challenges, but they also lead to great opportunities for us to really reach people where they're at. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about just, you already touched on some of the challenges, but kind of how this leads to some opportunities for us with ABLE training.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned a lot of challenges, right? Some of which I just spoke about, some are not on here that I didn't speak about, but you'll see some on the slides. But there may be high resistance to embracing something new. In law enforcement community, and I often bring this up in class, there are two things that law enforcement typically don't like. Number one is change, and number two is the way things are. So knowing that those cultural challenges exist really presents the opportunity in of itself to change that perception and a way of operating to embrace an environment that makes meaningful change. In ABLE, we often see students come in that have a perception of what ABLE is. And some of that perception is a lack of understanding about the project and understanding of how active bystandership can be used as a tool in their personal and professional life. When law enforcement professionals go through training, they're not necessarily using the term active bystandership. So we often have to introduce what active bystandership is, what it means, how it can be used as a tool, and utilizing the training and skills that they already possess. I personally love the buy-in phase of the curriculum because the way it's designed, and kudos to Karen and the team for putting this together. And I know Karen's going to kind of dive into this a little bit as we go into this presentation, but I like being able to present what the tool that ABLE provides and helping to change and shape that perception, because oftentimes the students are surprised of what they find, and they learn that the framework of ABLE is not what they thought, and really is opposite of the perceptions that they initially had. So, of course, there's this level of high resistance. You also have that lack of understanding, as I just mentioned. You have the potential culture conflict, right? In the class, we actually talk about the differences in loyalty, right? We talk about the difference between blind loyalty, where you're just kind of going in and you're just being loyal just in a blind manner, not necessarily holding that level of accountability, versus constructive loyalty, right? Perception there is more for the community, like this is more for the community and not so much for the police. Perception that this is another way we're telling police that they're doing something wrong, right? Also that perception that either command staff or the chief executive will not attend the training. So this is just another thing for the rank and file. And then, of course, that last bullet point there, right? Fear of change. In all these challenges, it creates a fantastic opportunity to overcome these challenges. If we truly break down all the challenges mentioned and those that were not even mentioned, I think we'll find that at the heart of those challenges is the feeling of fear. And the opportunity for ABLE is perfect, in my opinion, for the challenges law enforcement professionals face daily. ABLE teaches professionals how to intervene and how to accept intervention successfully and overcome the pre-existing inhibitors that we often talk about in the class and that we know exist, but sometimes don't acknowledge. It acknowledges and authorizes and empowers officers to intervene in each other's actions that may create unnecessary harm, regardless of their rank. And of course, we know ABLE is about creating an environment that expects and support intervention. To foster an environment of opportunities to these challenges, I think there's several things that could be done. First, I think law enforcement agencies should continue to create a culture of accountability and transparency. And this means having, I think, clear policies against misconduct and enforcing those policies fairly and consistently. And it also means being open and transparent about investigations into misconduct. Now, this also extends to an environment that makes ABLE principles in the application of a mitigating factor. Second, law enforcement agencies, I think, should train officers on active bystandership and make its application a daily habit. This means teaching officers how to identify inhibitors and intervene in misconduct and how to do so safely. And lastly, I think law enforcement agencies should continue to work with communities to build trust. This means listening to community concerns from the members in which they serve and taking the steps to address those concerns. In all, bystandership is an important tool for preventing misconduct, promoting accountability in the end of the day. And the current environment it is more important than ever to really create that environment where officers and community members feel safe to intervene when they see something that's going wrong. So I think the challenges that we talked about, there's so many opportunities here, especially with the ABLE curriculum, to be able to overcome these challenges. But there's steps to that process. And I know that Karen's going to get a little bit more here in a minute in terms of the design build and adult learning, because that is important. How we administer this program is equally as important as how they receive it. And so I don't want to cut into Karen's part, but she's going to really break that down. And I think this is how we overcome some of these challenges with these opportunities we're faced with.
Greg, thank you so much. I think that was spot on. And you're right, it's the perfect transition into talking to Karen about how the curriculum was designed. So Karen, can you talk to us about adult learning, why the curriculum is structured the way that it is, and how instructors can best ensure that their audience is grasping the content?
Yes, thank you, Lindy, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And Greg did absolutely set the stage for where we started the design process. So the number one place to start when designing a curriculum, which we did with ABLE, is to understand who the audience is, right? And understand not only how they learn, what their experience is, but also how they're coming into the class, which is what Greg just covered so beautifully. What is the mindset? What are the assumptions? What is the experience that's walking into the room? And really, when we think about the difference between, the experience we had as children in school learning and what it requires to really create learning in adults, it's two very different approaches. And I will say, just generally, this is changing. Really, what you see on the right in terms of the adult learning process, we're starting to understand children learn really well this way too. But that aside, we have to understand that for adults in particular, the role of the instructor is more a facilitator than a teacher. So we have to honor the experience that's in the room of the people who are participating in the class. We have to allow for opportunities for them to share their experience and to learn from the experience of peers. So the instructor is not the knower of everything, is not the holder of all of the content and the knowledge, but is really there to facilitate kind of the matching up of the experience in the room and where it is we're trying to take people in the class. Also, for adults, far more likely to engage in something that is both timely and relevant to them where they are right now. It's very hard to engage a class of adults with something that might help them 10 years down the road. But really, this is going to solve a pain that I'm experiencing right now and in the job that I'm currently doing. And then that whole idea, as I mentioned at the beginning, of meeting them where they are, recognizing what the resistance is, what the experience is, what the fear is, what the skepticism is about, and not trying to ignore that, but really trying to allow space for that. Because if we don't allow space for that at the beginning of the class, we don't really put people in a mindset where they're willing to learn. So one important thing to recognize from the perspective of learning is resilience is the very definition of learning, right? Learning is what resilience is all about. If I can fall forward, if I can learn from failures and bad experiences, that's what creates resilience. In an environment where we are feeling depleted of resilience, it's impossible to learn. So if we can't allow space at the beginning of the class for what people are experiencing, and in a way that is not judging that experience, right? We're not here to say you should feel that way, you shouldn't feel that way, just allowing space for what is, then we can move the class forward to a place where they can learn something new. So meeting them where they are is critical. Making sure that it's that the learning is both experiential and practical. In my mind, the worst training is the kind where people walk out going, that's great, but we can't do that. We can't do that in the job that we're in right now. We can't do that with the leadership we have right now. So making sure that people not only learn the skills, but believe that they can use them when they walk out the door and that they will be supported in using them when they walk out the door. And then, the last two bullets in my mind, training that a class that doesn't experience any resistance is not doing enough. So for real learning to happen, you have to create some discomfort. And that means being willing to challenge current thinking, being willing to challenge current assumptions, being willing to ask the question, is there another way to think about this? And making it safe to do that. So all of these characteristics really create a distinction for what it is to teach adults. And really, I think highlights the difference between, what we've all experienced in our education as young people and what makes it different now that we are older and more experienced. So with that, as we go through the design process for ABLE, we really start with, it's all about the audience, right? And so this, I think, is what is unique about instructional design. A lot of times when people design training, they take it from a content perspective, right? I know the content, I'm an expert in the content, and I'm just going to share the content. When we do that without understanding or mapping out the change we want to have occur in our audience, we miss opportunities to really connect our audience with that content. So we started first with, here's the experience we'd like for ABLE to facilitate. We know that people are coming in with high resistance, with some misperceptions about what ABLE is, what active bystandership is, what peer intervention is, and there is an emotional armor because of what's happening in law enforcement as a profession. So in the mind of the audience, we know many of our folks are walking in the room saying, here we go again, right? This is something that they're doing to us. Somebody's here to tell us what we're doing wrong, trying to fix us, all of those thoughts that are happening at the beginning of the class. What we want to see happen is for there to be a willingness to entertain a new thing, right? And that's really where that second thought bubble comes in, is like, well, how do we know this works? I'm willing to consider this, but how do we know it works? So people start to realize, okay, so this isn't what I thought it was. And in ABLE, we address that right out of the gate. All right, so it's not what I thought it was, but convince me of its legitimacy. Where else has this worked? Why should we embrace this? Is it proven? Once we can address that, and people can say, okay, I understand how active bystandership has worked in other professions that have similar characteristics and cultural characteristics that law enforcement has. Now, my next question as a participant is, well, is this actually going to work in my real work, right? Am I going to be able to use it in the work I do? It's fine for pilots, it's fine for doctors, right? But, policing is different. And is it actually going to work for us? So that's the step we have to get to next, which is teaching the actual how to intervene, right, in the course of law enforcement work. And we really want people to leave the room not only with, okay, I know how to do it, but I'm also willing to do it. I'm willing to give it a shot. And that's where leaders and the agency culture become critical in really facilitating the efficacy of the training by helping people feel you are safe to do this and you are expected to do this. And we'll talk about kind of the role of the agency later on, but that's really where training and the agency meet. Say, walking out of the door of the training, we can say people know how to do it, and by and large, they're willing to give it a try. And that's where the baton gets passed then to the agency and the agency leadership to really reinforce that confidence and the trust that those participants will need to have in order to actually use the skill. So with that experience mapped out, we can now design the training in a way that best facilitates that experience while also honoring everything we talked about that is true for adult learning. So this influences not only how we order the content, but the instructional strategies we use or the activities that we build that really allow sharing my own experience, learning from my peers' experience, all of making it safe, all of those adult learning characteristics. So we're using those two things together to create the design of the program. So just, to kind of walk through it at a high level, if you look at the left, here's where the student likely will be. And here in the training is how we're going to meet them where they are in that moment. So they come in with the highest resistance at the beginning by and large, right? Those misperceptions, the emotional armor I talked about. And this is where in the training, we have them talk about, where are you right now when you think about peer intervention and active bystandership? Just write it down. You don't have to share it, but name it, right? Put it out there. We talk about the case studies. We show opportunities for active bystandership in the work of policing, and we show the consequences of not intervening. And then we really redefine loyalty, because that is one of the biggest resistance points that we have is I can't, narc on my colleague. I can't get people in trouble. And why this is so important and why it's placed where it is right now in policing, it feels like it's happening to us, right? All of the reforms, all of the changes, it feels like to police officers that the tail is wagging the dog. And we have no control, we have no agency, it's just happening to us. What we really want to inspire early on is it can happen with you. And ABLE is about giving you the power to change the ending of the story, right? You have the power. You don't have to sit there and allow things to happen on the job that are going to hurt your colleagues, that are going to hurt your profession, that are going to hurt the community, that are going to hurt you. There's something you can do, and you can stop it, and you can change the outcome. That is huge. Having people feel like they have the agency to influence what is happening around them will impact recruiting. It will impact retention. It will impact morale. It'll impact engagement. So that is why that redefining loyalty is at the beginning, and for people to understand right away that, you've got the power to do this. So now we say, okay, cool, it's not what I thought it was, but how do we know it works? And of course, in the class, as you all know, we are clear about what ABLE is. We're clear about what ABLE isn't. We talk about how bystandership has been used in other professions and what the similarities are to policing in those professions. And we talk, of course, about the risks in policing and the harm that's caused. Once then, people kind of get to, okay, I can see how this is used in policing or could be valuable in policing. We have to really make sure that will it actually work in our world, though? So that sounds legit, but we're unique. We've got some unique things in our profession that doctors don't have, that airline pilots don't have. So we really then talk about why it works, right? And we talk equally about the social science and our audience's own experience, our lived experience. So it's one thing to talk about, here's what the science says, and that is legitimizing, but we can't ignore what our lived experience is. And so that's why those two things are given equal weight when we really create why this works, right? So we talk about, for example, how would an intervention work on you? What would you want? How would you want to have someone intervene on you? Those kinds of questions and discussions. We then introduce, of course, the Notice, Decide, Act. We talk about the brain science, understanding what it is to be human, not only as a police officer, but the people that we're interacting with, and how situations can trigger reactions in our physiology that impact our behavior. Understanding that is key to being able to intervene, not only on ourselves, but on others. Of course, the very explicit and practical tactics of distract, delegate, direct, and pact all help address this. Will this work in our work? And then finally, we get back to, we hope everyone ends with, we should be doing this. We should be doing this for ourselves. We should be doing this for each other, for our communities. I'm willing to do it. And that's when we come back to the case studies at the end. You can rewrite the ending of this. You have the power to change the harm that was caused. We go back to what has changed in our own perceptions, and then really reinforcing that agency's commitment to ABLE and reinforcing our personal commitments to active bystandership. So kind of in summary, when you think about the curriculum, that's a little bit of, behind the curtain in terms of how the program was designed and why it was designed the way it is. There are 4 threads that I think are the critical components to strengthening the curriculum that can't be overlooked or addressed too much. And that is really that redefining loyalty and coming back to that over and over and over again as we go through the curriculum, the case studies, right? And the curriculum's designed and prompts instructors to make those ties back to the case studies all the time, because that represents our lived experience. That's tying this to what we all have experienced in the work. Then, of course, how bystandership has worked in other professions. And finally, the social science experiments, tying back to what the science tells us, really helps throughout the curriculum reinforce and readdress those points of resistance over and over and over again.
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting for a second there, but thank you so much, Karen. I think that was incredibly interesting, and I'm sure everybody else would agree with that. Just kind of getting that, again, that peek behind the curtain about why the curriculum was designed the way that it was, and clearly very intentionally. I'm going to stop the screen share for a second just to ask the final few questions. So, of course, the session is about critical success factors. We've really covered that first one about, the mindset of law enforcement going in, what you expect your audience to look like, and then how you can address it as an instructor, and then how the curriculum addresses it. But I also want to talk about two other critical success factors with ABLE implementation. The first one being the selection of ABLE instructors, because that is so important. So, Greg, and then Karen, if you have anything to add as well, please do. But primarily, Greg, would you be able to talk about, what you think it means to be an ABLE instructor, what your responsibility is as an ABLE instructor, what kinds of people do we want to send to be in this role, and who do we not want to send?
Yeah, great question. First, for a quick second, I just got to acknowledge my inner nerd, because I love peek behind the curtain stuff. And so no matter how many times I've taught this, no matter how many times I listen to Karen, I'm always like intrigued by everything behind the curtain. So thank you, Karen, for that. It benefited, I'm sure, everyone here in the room, but including me, even though I've taught this a million times, I always look at things from an open lens and a different perspective. So that's just my inner nerd. I just had to acknowledge that for a second, because that was really good stuff. And I love the breakdown that you had there. So great question, Lindy. Back to the question, right? So we ask our agencies and guide agencies to be specific about the selection of the ABLE instructors, because it's an extremely important aspect of the ABLE implementation process. In my opinion, I think it's just as important as the agency executive committing to being an ABLE, because this is really a part of the first thing that students will see and experience in the ABLE implementation process. So ABLE instructors are they're really the first form of modeling of the ABLE principles and framework. And to be honest, their credibility absolutely matters to their students in which they're teaching this to and administering the curriculum to. I can tell you from my personal experience that every time I present ABLE, either in an executive session or teaching in the classroom, I'm being sized up, and my credibility is being assessed to determine, and it's by the students and attendees, my level of buy-in and whether or not they're going to buy in, regardless of my presented credentials. I've engaged with many agencies about their ABLE instructor selection process, and happily, most have developed the selection process with a panel to determine who will be the right fit as an ABLE instructor for the agency. So absolutely kudos, and a great takeaway for agencies that are considering maybe having a panel process. As most of you know, a part of the ABLE principles is a top to bottom, bottom to top approach. In other words, the chief executive down to the recruiting officer or civilian personnel must support and promote ABLE principles. And I often compare the ABLE instructor to a field training officer. The field training officer has one of the most important roles on any department. The FTO ensures that that recruit officer applies what they have learned from basic training and performs within policy, and more importantly, within the law. And if the FTO steers a recruit officer or civilian personnel into a path of negative shortcuts or bad practices, it perpetuates an environment of negative practice. If the FTO displays an attitude of frustration with the agency or bias towards a process, it has a negative impact on the new employee. Enable instructor selection process is similar in that he or she must exhibit a belief and passion for a changing environment. And the students will often model what they see and experience. And so an able instructor must have a level of energy that creates a level of synergy in a classroom. And the students must feel comfortable enough to express things that they would not normally express openly and not feel judged when they express these things openly. Even if someone is a new instructor, be it instructor period, general instruction, or an able instructor, it's important for an able instructor to have the ability to command the room and create a safe environment for their students. As we talk about what an able instructor should look like, it's also important to talk about what the able team does not recommend in terms of sending someone to be an able instructor. There are many different things, but this is just a few. All right, I'm not going to say many, but there's a few. One is someone that is not going to exhibit some type of negative discontentment with their agency or the implementation of ABLE. Obviously, that is counterproductive and is not really going to help with that implementation process. It's going to fail on arrival. And so we really encourage agencies not to send someone that may have that negative discontentment or negative disposition about themselves and trying to administer the curriculum. We recommend that they do not send anyone that has any type of severe negative disciplinary history. It's not hard for folks on the department to know when someone has a repeated history of discipline. And so that would not be a good display in modeling ABLE in front of them in the classroom. Members who have a history of creating a hostile and unwelcoming environment. I think some agencies know, some may not, but the rank and file absolutely do. And so that might not be the right choice or the right selection. We also encourage agencies not to send someone that they want to teach a lesson or someone that they believe needs the training in order to overcome some type of challenges or disciplinary issues that they may have been faced with. This is not that type of a project. And then also we ask for them not to send members that are not going to be committed to the principles of active bystandership. You know, when we administered the train-the-trainer curriculum as a part of our evaluation process, we looked in this partnership that we have with all the agencies out there to make sure that they're sending the right fits for them based on the commitments that they made for the curriculum implementation and commitments that they made in partnership with ABLE. And so if there's some concerns that we may have, we identify those concerns and we let agencies know because it is important. That is a really, really important position when administering this curriculum. So in essence, an ABLE instructor should be someone from where these challenges are being faced and be courageous enough to stand before their peers to lead change forward.
Lindy, I would love to add to that as well.
To invite you, please.
And I think in addition to everything Greg just laid out, I think it's important for instructors to expect resistance. I think one of the things I see from instructors is, you know, they want to be armed with, what do I say to this? What do I say to that? What do I say to that? And I think there's two things, and I completely understand that, and that is like a natural, right, response to, I got to have an answer to everything that somebody might ask me. But I would offer a couple of things to instructors. One is allow the curriculum to do part of that work. As I just outlined for you, the curriculum is designed to move the audience along all of those resistance points. You are not alone. You alone as an individual do not have to have an answer to every resistance point. Allow the curriculum to work. Suspend the desire to have everybody buy in immediately. Recognize that every person in that room is on their own individual learning path. Some people are going to get it right away. Some people are not going to get it till they walk out the door. And a small percentage of people might not get it till the week after training when they have a chance to really process and think about it. Also, allow the others in the room to address some of the resistance and to create, to help you create that learning for other people. So, you know, if you say it, it's one thing, if their peers say it, it's another. So I would offer that to instructors, is to really allow the curriculum to do its work, and don't feel like you're alone in addressing the resistance. Allow the others in the room to help you bring some of those resistors along, and recognize and say, you know, hey, you might not be getting this right now. I'll check back in with you, you know, later on in the class and see if you're still struggling with that.
Hey, Karen, if I could just double down on that, I mean, that is such an important thing that you mentioned there, is to expect that resistance. I remember in my early iterations of teaching ABLE, I went somewhere and we had a classroom full of folks, and they were very candid and let me know what city I was in, what state I was in, and how much time I had to convince them why they should be there. And you know, it sounds funny, but you know, sometimes the gloves come off in these classrooms, and no matter what I presented to them in terms of my credibility, they didn't care. And so, but not everyone in the classroom felt that way. And I was fully prepared, because my job and my role at that time was not to convince everyone. My job was to use my instructional skills and allow the curriculum and the design bit of the curriculum to walk me through the process of getting them where I ultimately wanted them to be 7+ hours later. And so this particular student, I actually told him, I said, you know, I'm sorry that you kind of feel that way, but give me until lunchtime. Give me till lunchtime to kind of get through this. Let's talk a little bit about it. And if this is not your reality, hey, it's no harm, no foul, no offense to me or anyone here in the room, you know. And some people actually spoke out and had competing thoughts on it. Well, at lunchtime, we ended up talking, and this person actually became one of the best students in the class. And it was completely not what they expected. So, you know, excellent point there, Karen. I mean, that you know, folks should go in not expecting to change everything right away, right? Just take that expectation out. Use the skills that you bring to the table, bring that personality that you bring that energy that you bring in creating that safe space. And as you mentioned, Karen, let the curriculum, let the design build of it, and work within the confines of the design to bring you through that. I love that slide that you had about the threads that strengthen the curriculum, because those are really, in my opinion, some core parts. And if you really break down the curriculum, and it's one thing to learn, but it's another thing to really understand what it is you're teaching. And in combination of both, they're both powerful, powerful tools in administering a curriculum, or any curriculum for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will, thank you, Greg. And I will say that this idea of convince me, you know, you're the expert, so now you have to convince me of this, is a very old way of thinking about training, right? And that when you have subject matter experts sort of in the forefront, that's what you get, right? So it's like, well, you're the expert, now you have to convince me, and here's all the things you don't know about the work I do, et cetera, right? And that's why lived experience, from the case studies to all the discussions that people have about their own experience, they will convince themselves. You don't have to convince them of anything. Going through the class and having those conversations and reflecting on their own experience, hearing the experience of their peers, they will convince themselves.
You know, I add one quick thing in the wrap up, and hopefully I don't jump into what our part 2 of this is going to be, because there will more than likely be a part 2 that really drills this down even further. But I always tell instructors, don't pretend to be something that you're not, right? And if you don't know something, just say you don't know it, and try to do your best to find an answer to it. And that could be calling someone on your team, that could be reaching out to someone on the ABLE team, because you know, law enforcement professionals, whether you're civilian or whether you're sworn, they're gonna identify the BS quickly. And when you lose that credibility, even working within design but a curriculum, it does become difficult. So, you know, just be yourself, right? And be authentic, and just allow the curriculum to take you through the process.
Absolutely. I just wanted to quickly reaffirm what both of you were saying, because obviously both of you are instructors, so you see it in front of the class. But I work on the implementation side of things, and I work with agencies after they've already begun ABLE training back at their agencies. And when I tell you in the conversations that I have, I hear the exact same refrain every single time that they say, you know, I was really nervous going into this. There was a lot of resistance at the beginning, but by the end of the day, everybody came around to it. And now we're having a lot of really great discussions. I hear that in almost every conversation. So if there's anybody who's either on this webinar right now or is watching later that is a first-time instructor and is really nervous about it, I promise that I hear this every day. You will get through it just fine. And by the end, I mean, I've never heard anybody say that they've had trouble once they've gotten all the way through the curriculum. So I just wanted to add my perspective on that as well before moving on to the next point. Oh, we've got somebody in the chat agreeing with me. Thank you. I love to hear it. So I want to talk about kind of just the final critical success factor that I wanted to talk about. So I think, Karen, you said earlier that you wanted to say to instructors, like, you are not alone. And that is so true. The curriculum is there to support you, but also our intention is that your agency and your program coordinator who is in charge of implementing ABLE is also there to support you as an instructor. So I wanted to talk to both of you about what you feel like the role of the agency and the program coordinator should ideally be in supporting an instructor.
Yeah, absolutely. There's quite a bit that we could talk about this. I'll just touch on a few things, and Karen, if you have anything, please chime in. But I would say in brief, the program and agency coordinators have an equally important role as the ABLE instructors, and they're there for a couple of different things. Importantly enough, supporting the ABLE instructors once they become ABLE instructors. They serve as that liaison between the ABLE team and their agency, as well as ensuring their ABLE instructors maintain the standards of administering their curriculum. They also ensure that the agency is practicing and committing to the commitments made when becoming an ABLE agency, and keeping their stakeholders who vested in their success in the initial application process are informed of their progress. Oftentimes agencies will get in, but they sometimes can forget about those stakeholders that had a vested interest in them being there. And so the program coordinators and agency coordinators are a really, really important tool. They also coordinate to ensure that the ABLE instructors have all the tools necessary for the department for their overall success, as well as the agency success, and work with the ABLE team when there are proposed changes or challenges to administration of the curriculum. Also making sure that their agency has the appropriate staffing. We know and realize that instructors will sometimes get promoted, they may retire, they may do some other things, and some of their functions in terms of being an instructor may be ancillary, where now they have other responsibilities and they won't be able to perform. So the coordinator is responsible also for making sure that they maintain that level of readiness and also having the appropriate level of staffing. There's some other responsibilities, but again, this is just a few of them. But the coordinator role is just as important, I would say, as the ABLE instructors themselves, and that support that they're going to need from the top to the bottom, and even as that coordinator is going to be very, very important in the overall success of the implementation process.
Yeah, I'll shift my attention to sort of the role of the agency beyond the program coordinator and after training, which I'm talking directly to the leadership now, and sergeant up. The number one thing you can do to maximize the efficacy of ABLE is to model intervention. Model it yourself. Tell your organization, tell your people, I expect you to intervene on me. I too am human, right? I too experience those things we learned in the social science experiments about brain science. And I expect you to intervene on me. And when that happens, accept it gracefully and, really create the safety and the trust that the agency is in fact committed to this culture of active bystandership, and that is all on the leaders of the organization to do that, right? Leaders go first. So once your people come out of the training and they're equipped with the skills and they're willing to do it, they are now waiting for evidence that they can in fact do it. And that is the job of the leaders, is to make that visible, make that apparent, that yes, in fact, we are doing this, and I will go first as the leader.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for that. And I want to pause just for a moment. We're nearing the end of our time. So if there are any questions that anybody who is in here watching right now has, please put them in the chat. But in the meantime, while we're kind of waiting for that, I just wanted to kind of add to the conversation that we were having earlier again about selection of able instructors. And I just wanted to preemptively guess what one question might be from somebody, just because I had this conversation with an agency recently where somebody had told me that they were paired with the only other instructor at their agency for ABLE, who had a massive fear of public speaking. And he was going into it saying that he was really stressed that he was going to have to kind of carry the load of the whole conversation and carry the load of the whole training. And so we kind of got into why that was. And he was telling me that they were having a really hard time actually with recruiting people who wanted to become ABLE instructors. And to me, at the end of the day, that's all about poor marketing of this program at your agency and poor communication of what this program is. This truly is an opportunity for leadership for people in your agency to step up and to show that they are a role model, that they are somebody that, you know, people can look up to, people can listen to, and hopefully, you know, being selected as an ABLE instructor is something that is a good mark on your resume for, you know, when you're looking for a promotion. And it really needs to be marketed that way in advance. You know, when you're bringing the training to your agency, you need to talk about what a great opportunity this is, not only for your agency, but also for leadership within. So I just wanted to kind of say that in terms of, you know, anybody having trouble with recruiting folks who want to become instructors, you really have to start with that mindset of what it really means to be a part of the program.
Yeah,
and
you know, Lindy, I'll just add to that. It kind of goes to what I mentioned earlier, right? If we kind of pull back the banana peel of what's at the nucleus of things that inhibit, you know, intervention, is also at the center of, you know, that as an instructor, right? Which is fear. Is one word, fear. And that's kind of a self-imposed inhibitor. And I always tell, especially the new instructors that come through that have never taught anything before, to just have that confidence and belief in yourself. You have so much support behind you. You'll find that after about 20 minutes of actually teaching this, that confidence comes because the design of the curriculum walks you through the process and helps you along with that buy-in part of it. And then that person standing there on their own 2 feet as they present themselves, right? Who they are, what they are, they're among their peers. And that credibility is automatically there because that person comes from them. Usually for us on the ABLE team, we're an outside entity coming into an agency. So the assessment wall and that is already there, right? It's not so much in your own environment. So yeah, I think that's fantastic advice there. And that they just have to overcome that fear and not worry. I was with an agency, a large agency, and I know we got to get to questions here, but I was with a large agency and they walked me through their selection process. And each and every one of those instructors were excited to be there. They really wanted to do this process. And I had a few students out of the 30 that was there that said that they absolutely have a fear of public speaking, but this was a great way for them to overcome that fear. And I thought that was very commendable when they ended up being some fantastic instructors.
Okay, so in terms of some of the questions in the chat, I'll just read them out loud for the sake of the recording of this. A couple of folks were asking for a copy of the slide deck that we use today. I'm happy to send that out to everybody here. But if you're watching this in the future and you want a copy of the slide deck, you can please feel free to reach out to us in the ABLE inbox, and I'd be happy to send that to you as well. The ABLE inbox is able, ABLE, @georgetown.edu. The next question is about keeping the training fresh and interesting outside of just doing the refresher curriculum. I will say something that I often recommend for folks who are looking for new things to do is trying to even just revisiting some of those core concepts from the training, like going through the PACT model or going through the 3Ds even during roll call training. If you have like 5-10 minutes that you want to just revisit the concept, and you can either have an ABLE instructor do it or the program coordinator if they feel comfortable, or even just, you know, whoever's leading roll call training that day, given that they've been through the training, hopefully they're familiar with the concepts, just kind of revisiting those things. I also hear a lot of folks that say that they, you know, when you're having conversations about things that are happening in the national landscape of law enforcement, and these are things that are just naturally coming up in, you know, everyday conversation at your agency, is just trying to add kind of that ABLE perspective to things, and just throwing out there, you know, since our agency has been through ABLE, how could this have gone differently if something like this happened to our agency, and really just kind of breaking it down that way. If you're also looking for, you know, more ways to keep it fresh, you know, some agencies, their chief sends out a newsletter frequently, just talking about a variety of things happening locally in the community, or just happening at the agency, and having a little reminder of ABLE in there as well is a really great way to keep it top of mind for folks. If you haven't already looked, we have a lot of really excellent resources in our instructor portal. If you kind of scroll down to the implementation resources section, and also I am so happy to brainstorm with anybody who has a great idea or just wants to talk more about this. You can always please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat. But this is my role at ABLE, is to help folks with this implementation process. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Do we have anything to add from Greg or Karen on this?
I would add, I love those ideas, Lindy, and I think they're would be fantastic. And I think also recognizing what your agency is already doing well. So in after action reviews and tactical situations, you know, asking the questions about, you know, when they may have experienced a potential inhibitor and how they worked on any self-calming techniques, you know, talking about, you know, where early decisions were made that really resulted in a positive outcome. Because I know after action reviews are really focused on here's what we can do better in terms of organizational learning, really making visible to people what we're doing well, and continuing to bring that to the forefront of our consciousness helps deepen that strength. So kind of that equal focus on not only what are the opportunities that we may have missed, but what are the things that we're doing right that you may have done not so consciously in the moment, but we want to make sure we raise it to your awareness so that it can happen again.
Absolutely agree, Karen. And I'm sorry, Greg, if you had something that you wanted to ask, but just because we're nearing the end, we got another really great question from Richard in the chat. And I'll read it out loud again for the recording. How do we keep our team members interested and engaged? All of us on the call are committed and passionate about ABLE. How do we continue to cultivate this passion and interest so that it permeates throughout our organization? How do we maintain momentum and commitment? How do you get the team to prioritize ABLE compared with other workload and programs? What an excellent question. And I will just give that right off to you, Greg, and Karen to answer.
Yeah, so a lot of questions in there that can to unpack, but hopefully I can try to, I don't know, pack it here a little bit. Those are fantastic questions. You know, I would first say, as a part of that holistic, remember the holistic approach, right? Remember that kind of that pie looking thing that shows the department-wide implementation, where it touches really every aspect of the agency at different levels. If you can encapsulate that within the agency, because that's a part of that top to bottom approach, right? That really helps to keep everybody committed and keep that passion going. Oftentimes I see agencies, and we experience here, some agencies will send someone that's going to serve as the ambassador, not so much to teach it, but as an ambassador. And it's usually someone that's of a higher level to help support what you're already doing in place, right? Help to support those instructors. Infusing ABLE into different training curriculums like firearms or defensive tactics or crisis intervention. Not just the 2 hour dedicated training that has a purpose and a reason and it's there, but also infusing it into other things, putting it as a part of your roll call regimen, only taking about 5 minutes in your roll call or your team meetings, right? Talking about a specific set of frameworks, using some examples. Those are the ways I think that kind of creates and cultivates that passion and interest from within and makes it a part of a regular regimen, and keep that momentum and that commitment going forward. Um, I, I know the question that you asked about the workload. That, I mean, that is absolutely a lot going on there, right? And sometimes that workload can kind of shift in a way that could sometimes perceive putting some of the able thought processes to the side a little bit. I would challenge your agency to make it a priority, make it a part of that workload, right? And again, as I mentioned, even if you're just touching it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes in a team meeting or infusing it, has the ability to be able to commit it to long-term memory. I always kind of like to use this example. If you check your mailbox and someone wants to help sell your home in the neighborhood, 20, 30, 40 mailers out.
Sorry, Greg, we lost you for a second, I think. Can you
Okay.
give your metaphor one more time about?
Yeah, no problem. I just saw the little thing that said unstable. So sorry about that. Yeah, so like if you could think about going to your mailbox and let's say a realtor is trying to get you to sell a house in your neighborhood or they just sold something, you're going to know who that realtor is by name and by agency because that realtor is touching you 10, 15, 20 times, whether it be at a span of 3 months, whether it be a span of 6 months. But nonetheless, when it comes time for you to sell your home or you want to find out who the person is in that community that handles that, it's going to be that person by name and by agency. Think of Able kind of in that same light. The more that you put Able out there in your agency holistically, whether it be posters or framework, whether it be things that you put on your MDT in your cars, whether it be decals, whether it be hitting it in different meetings, those are the different things I think that keeps the passion going. It helps to make it easier for you as an instructor, but it embodies and emboldens Able and it makes it part of everyday culture. It just has to be a repeated process. So this is just a couple of things. I can probably talk about this all day, but there's just a couple of things that comes to mind. But fantastic question. Great question, Richard.
Thank you, Greg. That was really great. We did have one more question that was put into the Q&A about, that somebody was asking for some case studies that focus on civilian staff because this agency mixes their classes with sworn and non-sworn audience members. And not only is that an excellent idea, but also something that we are piloting this fall. So happy to be doing that. And so hopefully we're going to have a resource available shortly, but we hear you on that. We've heard that before and are definitely working on that. And okay, I don't think that this is a question in the chat, but you know what? We've actually run over time. I don't want to keep anybody here for longer than they need to be. The three of us are very happy to hang behind and answer any further questions that anybody has. But otherwise, thank you all so much for being here. We have another learning session coming up on September 26th. We'll be sending out an email about that. We're doing them monthly going forward. So please stay tuned for that. But otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us. And a special thank you to Greg and Karen for all of your work going into this. We love when you share your expertise with our community. Thank you.